our topic is going to be on cooling systems and common problems that people run into when they're working on their vehicles themselves. And I'm going to put out a hypothetical situation here. Say you just changed the water pump in your car, or the radiator, or anything that has to do with taking apart and draining the cooling system. So here we have this late 2000s Mazda CX-5 or something like that. The turbo was just replaced on it, and in order to get to the back of everything and where the turbo is located, it's got to have the cooling system dismantled and drained. So the customer got their vehicle back, and they drove it for a couple hundred kilometers and noticed that they were losing the heat in the middle of winter, and then followed by the vehicle overheating. They then checked the coolant and noticed that the level was low, so they would fill up the cooling system and then continue driving, only to find the next day that it's low again and the vehicle's overheating with no heat again. And to top it all off, on top of that, the engine light comes on and it's a PO 125 code saying that there's an insufficient coolant temperature. So how could the engine overheat but yet still get an insufficient coolant temperature code? Well, the answer is actually really simple. There's no coolant in the system by the sensor for it to actually detect proper cooling temperature, which means that the little bit of coolant that might go past the sensor would note the vehicle is overheating, but then also on the other end of the spectrum it could be too cold and the engine's not detecting the temperature at all. So the diagnosis is there's air pockets in the cooling system. And how might you get that all out and make sure there's no air bubbles in the system? It's actually quite simple in a lot of cars, and I'll show you how today. Now, there's two things that most people need to understand when they're doing the cooling system on a vehicle. There's your radiator with the cap, and there's your reservoir. Now, there's a difference between the two, and you can't just top up your cooling system in the reservoir, because if you do that, then you're not actually getting the coolant where it needs to be. I know that the reservoir can draw the coolant into the system as needed, but for that to be effective, you actually have to get all the air pockets out of the main cooling system first, which means making sure this level is topped up all the way. As you can see, well, you can see a little bit of coolant down there, but it's actually not completely full right now. If you have a GM vehicle, then it's all a pressurized reservoir tank, which is just one cap and one reservoir, which is fine. Fill it completely full, start the vehicle, run it for a short time, and then shut it off again, I would say after 5 minutes, and then allow it to settle, and then top up the fluid once again. Then you do that a few times, and then the fluid should stop going down in there, which means that you can then fill up a reasonable amount in your reservoir just in case it needs to pull from it later on. And make sure if you have a reservoir tank like this that this seals properly and that this hose is in also good condition, because if that is not working properly, if it's cracked or damaged, you're not going to get coolant going to and from the reservoir as it needs, and that might lead to a future overheating problem as well if you have a small leak in the system. Have a look at your rad cap, make sure it's in good shape. Check the seal on the main seal here. Check the upper seal there. Make sure everything is in good working order and that your spring is in good shape as well. Make sure that all flows and works good. It shouldn't look too crusty or have too much buildup on it. And if it is, you want to clean it on here as well as around the mouth here. This one looks pretty good, so I don't think that's going to be a problem. Well, now you've got the rad full, you've got the reservoir full, or like your GM vehicle, that whole unit nice and full up to the full line, and you're going to let this vehicle run up to operating temperature. But don't think you're done just there, because once the thermostat opens, you're going to open up a whole new ball game, and you're going to have coolant that's now flowing around the radiator, and you might get little excess air pockets coming through from there, which means your fluid level might drop again. In order to achieve that temperature, you're going to have to make sure you have your rad cap closed. So at this point, you're going to have to get it up to full operating temperature. Make sure the rad fans kick on, that it's up to operating temperature completely, and then after you've gotten it to that point, you're going to shut it off and let it settle. And actually, right now, that's at the point where I am right now. Engine was just at operating temperature, the rad fans are kicked off and on, and now I'm just topping it up as my final little bit. I'm going to fill it until it's right full. Close her up. Check this guy one more time. And most cars, that's all you really need to do. Sometimes there's a bleeder screw up top somewhere up high that you can crack free, and then you can get any excess air out that way. Some vehicles don't have that, and it's just a coolant temperature sensor. It needs to be removed or cracked free. But I've never had a problem with most newer, or should I say late 90s and newer vehicles by just doing it the way I just mentioned. And if you do that, I don't think you'll have any problems. The guy that worked on this vehicle, he thought the cooling system was full, and it used this whole jug. I know 2 liters doesn't seem like a lot, but for a vehicle like this, I haven't looked up the exact spec, but this vehicle probably has a 10-liter capacity. That's 20% of the entire cooling system's capacity, and especially when the reservoir is empty, that's quite a bit that you're missing, and that's the difference between overheating and not, and having no heat. Start her up, get her up to operating temperature. She cold, she's been sitting for a while. That's good and full because she's coming out. She's only been running for a couple seconds. That's what you want. Nice and full. Whatever's in here will take up the slack, and we're good. She's starting to climb. Well, we're up to operating temperature now. Got lots of heat coming out. Just been running for about 15 minutes now at 2,500 RPMs. Rad's been kicking on and off. Problem is solved. Well guys, I hope this video helped you guys out a little bit. Just a couple things to try before you assume the worst is wrong with your vehicle. Like and subscribe my channel here, and I'll bring more to you guys as it comes. Thanks for watching.